Morning, everybody. Hope you're well. I think this is probably one of the first actual live dog walks of the new year. I do quite a lot of them or I do a few, as many as I can for the patrons. Now I've found a way to get those up and running nice and easily. But I haven't really done all that many live from the streets of the Wolds, but I am doing this morning. But it isn't going to be quite as advertised. So I have labelled this, and please forgive me because I can't see the title, as something like an all-time worst 11. But there's a real journey. There's a route to kind of get to this all-time 11, which I need to probably pick up on. I've also just realised I've only gone live on YouTube rather than Facebook as well. So it will be very few of you will see this at first, but hopefully we'll catch up with it at a later date. So a couple of weeks ago, one of our Patreons asked Ben and Charlie, I believe, to do their all-time best Lincoln City 11. And it's standard stuff, isn't it? We've all been fans for different times, for different lengths of time. So we'll go, well, I really liked X player, I really liked Y player. You have to make excuses why you're not putting Mick Harford in, because I'm not kind of 50 or whatever, so I didn't see him play. And it's great. It's good for debate. And people like me will go, well, if you've ever seen Gareth Ainsworth, and then millennials will go Simon Yeo. And it's brilliant. I love all that. And it just is something good to talk about, particularly when we get to this stage of the season where there isn't a huge amount to talk about on the pitch. And look, that's a good thing in reality. You know, when I keep hearing things like we can't let the season peter out in March, I think, well, we're safe, aren't we? And I know it's probably a real pessimistic thing to say, but I am an eternal pessimist. A pessimist is never disappointed. And so for me, the first thing every single season is survival at this level. Certainly how we are now. If we were Birmingham, that wouldn't be the case. But where we are, who we are, I think survival. And as soon as you've hit that, you kind of go, there we go. We've got another season at this level. We got, trips next season, likely to the likes of Huddersfield and Bolton, and there'll be teams coming down. We might be playing Luton next year. There's an opportunity perhaps to go to Notts County next year. It's another adventure, another chapter. So actually, I don't see the season petering out as being such a bad thing. Not really. Rather that than going into the last weekend of the season with our bums clenched, looking below us, hoping that Burton Albion don't pick up their inevitable final day win to stay up. Fuck that. So that's why it's nice to have a little bit of discussion. Because we're all Lincoln City fans. And whilst when you have opinions on what's happening right now, they can become quite divisive. So Joe Van McCarma's great, Joe Van McCarma's crap. By the way, the first one's true. People get loggerheads and then they dig their heels in. And quite often it's the worst arguments between the fans of the same team. You can stand and talk to a Grimsby fan and you're arguing just because he wears black and white and you wear red and white. But when you're a Lincoln fan and you argue with another Lincoln fan, Lincoln are your team, you believe you know best. I believe I know best. You believe you know best. And so once your point of view and my point of view don't align, if you're the sort of person that goes, well, I'm not having that, that's when the arguments get worse. I've said it a million times before. One of the worst football arguments I've ever seen was back in 2001, and it was between two Leicester City fans. We went away on a training camp. I was working for Jackson Building Centres at the time. I was a trainee manager. I can't remember one of the guys' names was James Beebe. Turned out to be a great friend of mine, lovely chap, Leicester City fan. And there was another guy there who was a Leicester City fan. I think his name was Rob. So we thought, we'll sit them together because they're Leicester fans. They'll get on. And within half an hour, one of them had the other by the throat because of the differing opinions they had about the manager. It was absolutely brutal. And that always stuck with me. So it's nice to be able to have debates about things in the past because that kind of becomes irrelevant opinion. Does that make sense? So if you're arguing about Joe Van McCarma, something is going to prove you right or wrong next week, and something could disprove that the week after. So it's still relevant. You could still be 10th. He could get a hat trick, and then you can come in going, I was right about Joe Van McCarma, like everyone did last week. He could sky an effort, and then the others come in and go, I was right about him. So it still matters. But whereas if you're going, well, I think it's Simon Yeo, I think it's Gareth Ainsworth in an all-time 11, then it doesn't really matter because people can then go, yeah, he was a great player. And by the way, we're talking about all positive things. So if you're arguing who was the better player between Ainsworth and Yeo, Ainsworth, by the way, if you're arguing that, it's all the positives because you'll go, I remember Yayo's hat-trick. I remember Ainsworth's hat-trick. I remember Yayo's last-minute goal against Torquay. I remember Ainsworth's last-minute goal against somebody who he scored a last-minute goal against that can't come straight to my mind because it was 30 years ago. So that's where we are. Now, when it comes to a worst 11, I think it's even less likely that people are going to fall out unless you put somebody in a worst 11 that somebody else really rated. But again, that kind of then becomes a discussion. And again, another discussion I've always had with another Lincoln fan, this Kev Barwise. Me and Kev have always disagreed about the merits of Scott Kerr. I loved Scott Kerr. Hard worker, always pushed himself, always put his body on the line for Lincoln City. Desperately unlucky to be loaned out in the 2010-11 season. Believe if he had stayed, we might have stayed up. Kev didn't think that he was a decent player. We always have that debate. Now, it was on yesterday's podcast, which is here on YouTube, available on Acast, posted on the site. Don't forget it. That we. It was suggested by Emily Rook, I believe, that we do a worst Lincoln City 11. Now, that could be really easy. Gomez Darley played about 3 games, got sent off in the first minute, one of them. He was shit. He's got to be in one of them. Pat Kanyuka, the 6-0, Rotherham, he's got to be in it. But that almost becomes the easy worst 11, doesn't it? Because it's easy to go, well, Simon Brown was the goalkeeper. He played 1 game. We conceded 5 against Peterborough. He's the worst keeper that we've had. Arguably, you could say that. Alan Sheehan giving the penalty away against Burton Albion in his only game. He's one of the worst players we've had. It's almost like an easy go-to. When I think it becomes more challenging is when, rather than calling it a worst 11, we look at the opposite best 11. So there was a couple of, I set these credentials for me. When I was picking my best 11, it was no loan players. It was players who had to have been owned by Lincoln and had to have played, in my head, for a best 11, you have to kind of 20, 30 games as a bare minimum. So what if you were to look for a worst 11 or an alternative 11 of players who just wouldn't get in the best? What if you set a credential of we had to own those players? So no loan players. What if we also said no short-term deals? So these players have got to have started at least, 15 games, 25 games? And because we're only on YouTube, haven't got a huge number of people watching at the moment because I didn't promote it either. So would you say 25 games? Probably so. So that made me think maybe we set a little challenge. Flossie Tops, thank you so much. You'll never, ever let me down. You could pick 3 best teams. The difference is football from 30 years ago bears no resemblance to the game today. Exactly. And that's the same for the worst players. Because somebody said to me a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sorry to go on about Jovan, but they said to me the other week ago, he's one of the worst players I've ever seen in a Lincoln City shirt. And I thought, he's 21, I think, years old. He's now got 11 goals, by the way. At the time, he'd got 6, maybe 5 or 6. He's playing League One football against defenders that have played in the Bundesliga, against defenders that play international football. And he's one of the worst that we've seen. And then you think back to some of the other wingers and players that we've had in the National League. It absolutely pains me because the football was very different. And again, to go back to Flossie's point there, it's all comparable, isn't it? If you were to pick your best Lincoln City team, probably wouldn't include Alex Woodyard. But comparatively, Alex Woodyard in the 2016-17 season was outstanding. Lots of people would pick their best Lincoln City team and would actually have Matt Reed in it. How could, in all seriousness, anybody put Matt Reed over even James Collins, even though James Collins has scored 5 in 12? So then it becomes not the best team, but it becomes the team that have had the most impact, the kind of cult hero team. And that's why these are always brilliant, these kind of lists, because they change every single time I get asked to do a best 11. It changes. Alex Palmer, I think I picked as my goalkeeper this time, but Alan Marriott has been there in the past as well. So what I've done this short video to kind of throw it out there, I think, a little bit for everybody else to think about doing their alternative best 11, their opposite best 11. So you're looking at picking a team of 11 players who would stand absolutely zero chance of getting in to a Lincoln City best 11. full stop. But they have got to have played at least, I think, 25 games for the football club. And I'm talking, there's got to have been a handful of starts in there. So I think that's the criteria. I don't want to see a Simon Brown or a Gomez Darley or an Alan Shee and all the same old names rolled out time after time. Let's have a look at something different. Let's have a look at players who were ours. Just 1 second. Are we done? I think you might be done today. Let's have a look at players that were ours. Now, there are some obvious names that jump straight out for me that will cause debate. First one of the first ones for me is Ollie Palmer. Was a player who I really didn't like. And there, he is about attitude. So in your worst 11s, and I will put this up as an article with the video embedded. So obviously you 9 that are watching now are kind of getting the early heads up. But yeah, Ollie Palmer, I mean, he did all right for us. But for me, he would be a million miles away from getting into a best 11. We can't really label it the worst 11. If you have any ideas in the comments, let me know what you think we should call it. Chris Maguire. I mean, Maguire only turned up for one game, if I remember correctly. He was somebody that I don't think people had an awful lot of love for. He would almost certainly get into this side. What about goalkeepers? We've been fairly blessed with goalkeepers over the last few seasons. You're going to have to go back an awful long way, I think, to find a goalkeeper worthy of this. Remember, you can't have the lad that came on loan from Aston Villa, whose name escapes me, in 2010-11, because he came on loan. So you're going to have to go an awful long way back. What, to the days of John Vaughan was a decent goalkeeper. Joe Anion might be one that we drop in there. Nick Townsend was only ever on loan. Paul Farman's definitely not going to get in the worst. But if you think since we've come up, goalkeepers we've owned, I don't think we've really had a bad one. Same with centre halves. Remember, Pat Kanyuka didn't play enough times for Lincoln to drop in this. So you've got to look at centre halves who did play plenty of games. And it all gets a little bit difficult, doesn't it? And like Andy Brown says, and I know he's here probably referring to the Makama chat, but it's all about opinions, and rarely do two people have the same opinion. And that's why the best debates are the ones where the opinions are not proven or disproven a week after. Because for me, an opinion, I'm going off on a tangent again, but for me, an opinion is something that you should always be willing to change, like your underwear. Probably not change it quite as regularly as your underwear, or not in some people's cases, I assume. But if you have an opinion on a player who has already left the football club, then it's harder to have to feel that you can change that opinion or not. I actually have. There have been times where I have retrospectively looked back and changed my opinion on a player or a period in time, given the passage of time. I can't actually think who it was now. There was a player who I got loads of stick to at the time I thought was really poor. I mean, Jason Lee's a classic example, isn't he? Right, I'm done with the dog. Jason Lee's a classic example. He was absolutely hammered at the time when he was at Lincoln. Come on, boy, we'll go back. It's too muddy. He was hammered. But now, looking back, he's gone on. He's played Premier League football. You know, he had a phenomenal career. So it's easy to change that opinion. I think there's a few players, there's managers like that as well. I have a kind of a personal issue. I know that sounds wrong, but Peter Jackson for me wasn't a good manager for the club. I didn't like him. A lot of people loved him, and I just wonder maybe it was my experiences have clouded my judgment and my opinion, and I'm willing to change that. I'm willing to listen to people. So we'll go back to this, just to recap before I disappear. We'll go back to this worst 11. You can drop them to me on an email, gazhutch88@gmail.com. And I will try and put some of the best ones up. We might even do a little discussion. We might do a podcast special. This week, there isn't an awful lot to talk about on Thursday, rather than looking ahead to the game. So I might have a word with Charlie, and I think it's Chris and Ben actually who's on. Might have a word with them and see if I can hijack the podcast and we put this together. But we're looking for your alternative best 11, your opposite best 11. So the 11 Lincoln City players who have been staple Lincoln City players, players who, you know, are not just names plucked from the past that people are going to go, oh, I can't remember him. You know, we're talking Dean Cropper up top, And you get about 4 goals the whole time. Would Dean Cropper make your list? We're talking potentially, who was the pointy, shouty guy in the middle of the park? Gary Mills. Remember Gary Mills? So take everything into consideration. It might be a player that you just have beef with, who others are going to go, why on earth have you picked him? But somebody will go, no, I am picking him. I know Kate Jackson isn't a big Simon Yeo fan, believes that goal scoring record is massively skewed by a couple of good months. And in actual fact, Yeo was never all that prolific. Maybe Kate would pick Simon Yeo. I'm pretty sure there are strikers that would go in ahead of Simon Yeo. So we're looking players that Lincoln have owned, 25 games or more. The alternative, the opposite, Lincoln City best 11. Well, I've got 10 of you on. If there's any questions whatsoever, I am more than happy to answer those. I've just seen that my phone hasn't charged overnight. It does this every so often. It's one of these adaptive charging things. It's a right pain. So there we go. First day of spring. Lincoln City are more or less safe. I think when you're safe on the first day of spring, that's an achievement at this level. I was perfectly happy with Saturday's performance. I thought that we did well. I thought we should have won the game on another afternoon. We do win the game. There's been that many performances this season, I think, where we've come away going, we should have taken something from that. Both games against Exeter, one of the games against Bristol Rovers. You're looking at Wrexham, you look at Huddersfield away, where we only got a point, should have got 3. Leyton Orient, where we certainly should have taken some. There's so many games where we've been that close to taking more than we have. We're not a million miles away, if I'm honest, from being a top 10 side. The things that we're doing now over the last few weeks in the 4-2-3-1, I think is probably how Michael Skubala would like to have played when he first came in. But I think he came in, we were set up for 3-5-2. He had to use what we already had. And then when the transfer window opened with Freddie and Joe Taylor coming in, the 3-5-2 just fitted what we were already doing and the work that he'd already put in. So over the summer, it worked fine at the end of the season. So rather than go to the 4-2-3-1, which I think he prefers, he stayed with the 3-5-2. It hasn't been bad. We haven't done badly this season. We haven't done well, but we haven't done badly. So yeah, there we go. Right. Seeing as there are no questions, I will disappear. My friend Pete is calling, which is bound to be because he's listening to the podcast and we've mentioned his James Collins question. So yeah, get those teams in. I'll put this up as an article, so you may be watching this embedded on the website, and we'll see if we can come up with some opposite Lincoln City all-time 11s. In the meantime, up the imp.